Well, good morning, and it's Friday. Friday the 5th, if I've got my sums right, of April 2019. And yes, I put up the death of English democracy. A pretty serious topic, and one that I'm going to talk about for a few minutes, in a few minutes. First of all, one of the things that I find that modern life has lost are some of the simple things. For instance, who eats just simply toast and lashings of butter anymore? It's got to have some product on it. Nutella or Marmite or all sorts of things before anybody will eat it. And yet, a very simple toast and butter, just absolutely delightful, and an English dish. And I say English because I think today I want to talk about England rather than the United Kingdom. The Scots and the Welsh and the Irish, Northern Irish, have their own axes to grind. England must look after itself. In the long run, it must look after its constituent parts. But for the moment, let's talk about England. It's very English. Delicious, but almost dead. At one time, you could go into a pub and there would be flitches of ham hanging behind the bar. You could get a decent pork pie and a decent sausage roll. In Lewes, there's only one pub that I know that does a pork pie, a decent one, and that's the Gardeners, which is a traditional pub, and thank God it still exists. That doesn't mean to say that there aren't some very good pubs in the modern sense in Lewes. There are. In fact, we are very lucky. Out of the 16 or so pubs that are left, is almost all of them are of pretty high standard, pretty nice places to go to, pretty good food. But traditional? No. Whatever happened to a dripping sandwich? I can remember when the dripping from the Sunday roast was congealed and spread on bread and toast so that you could have it on a Monday, just as you could have bubble and squeak. Whatever happened to bubble and squeak? Some fancy restaurants offer something that they call bubble and squeak. It isn't. It's some manufactured process thing. Real bubble and squeak, as defined in Wind in the Willows, that very finest of books, the best book ever written in my view, Wind in the Willows. That's just my view. But cabbage and potatoes, the mashed potatoes left over from Sunday, fried up into a dish to be had, mouth-watering dish on the Monday, and the jailer's daughter brings it to Toad of Toad Hall, who is languishing in jail after driving his car quite recklessly around the roads. Boop, 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 boop. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it says something like, "And the smell of cabbage hung in the air, as the smell of cabbage is wont to do." And indeed, it evokes very much the smell of that particular vegetable, because it does sort of hang into the air before it disappears. Reminisce? Yes, because there was an article the other day that said being English has gone. that it's a figment of our, not imagination, but perhaps of our remembrance of the past. And I would go along with that, it has. But that doesn't mean to say that we should reject some of the good things that this country has offered to us over, well, 1,000 years, but certainly in the last 100, in terms of food, in terms of politesse, in terms of motor cars. We have been classical. We have been iconic. The Black Taxi, Big Ben. And what about this? There's Big Ben, the House of Commons. So that brings me to this, the death of English democracy. Because what's been going on here, along with the connivance of most of us, has seen what I believe is the death of English democracy. We don't have a constitution. Sorry, I take that back. We don't have a written constitution in the United Kingdom, which covers England. We have a constitutional monarchy, which is covered by decree and precedent. And the unseemly haste with which our politicians, for whatever reason, whether it's pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit, have been dashing to twist and turn our key part of our constitution, and that is the sovereignty of the House of Commons, to their own ends, has been not only dismaying, but unseemly. And like Oliver Cromwell, I would hope that most of those people that have done this damage aren't seen in the House of Commons again. I can't remember the exact phrase that he used, but it was something like, "May God see the end of you here," or "Leave this place." That's the quote. "For God's sake, leave this place." And that's the way I feel about our politicians. For God's sake, leave this place. Because actually, Brexit or not Brexit isn't the issue. It's what are we going to leave as a legacy for our children and our grandchildren when it comes to our rule of law, because we have tampered with it and we have twisted it and we have turned it to individual and self-interest over the past 3 or 4 weeks, perhaps longer than that. So, democracy, which first sparked here in Lewes, and that's where I'm broadcasting from, Lewes, in the not quite south coast, but the southeast of England, the county town of East Sussex, not only the home of democracy from the Battle of Lewes in 1264, which saw in May 1264 the first Parliament sit in Westminster, but also the home of Tom Paine, who wrote about the rights of man, who used the phrase, the House of Commons, long before there was a House of Commons, who coined the phrase, the United States, long before there was a United States. It started here. And in my view, it's ending here. And we've connived. Instead of asking for rule of law, I can't find anywhere on social media any sort of survey or petition saying, please, politicians, please behave yourselves and follow rule of law, no matter what that may mean in terms of Brexit or not Brexit. Follow rule of law. Stop this unseemly twisting and turning, which eventually can go into the statute books, if you like, and that future generations will be bound by. Can you imagine what's going to happen when any difficult situation arises in the future, they're going to say, well, sovereignty of the House of Commons, this is what they did when it came to Brexit, so we can do it now. If we're not careful, we'll be ungovernable. We're opening the door to all sorts of things that could happen, and nobody cares. The triumphalism on the internet is quite shocking. 5 million votes. Well, I mean, if you're going to believe that survey, you'll believe anything. But people want to believe it, and therefore they are believing it, and they're paying absolutely no attention to rule of law, and it's disgraceful. The other side start a petition, and because they don't want to fall into the trap of having people sign up 27 times, or with names like Johnny Appleseed, or Joseph Stalin, or whatever, ask for details which they weren't going to get. So nobody would vote for that. So what are these surveys all about? They are just to actually try to fulfill a prophecy. And if that's the way you want it, then by all means you have it. But the fact that we actually want to tie our children to these sort of silly shenanigans is disgraceful in my view. And nobody uses logic. Well, that's not true. Some people have used logic. There has been some very interesting posts on social media. But mostly you see that 10 or 15 or 20 people have watched. When somebody gets strident and says something as stupid as they possibly can, you get 5,000, 5 million. And we've connived. We've connived in the death of democracy. Have I? Of course I have. I've been as daft as anybody. I've expressed opinions about Brexit and non-Brexit as much as anybody, without a great deal of evidence, because there isn't much. Nobody knows. We're gazing into a crystal ball. It's the future. But it's the future of democracy, and therefore of the way that our children will be governed in the future, that we've been watching destroyed by the people that we elect to look after and put a sacred trust in. Okay, many people will say, but, he's the people's vote. Oh, and this is what people thought. Well, we saw what happened with people's votes when the House of Commons managed to wrest authority from the government, good, bad, or indifferent. They can't ever agree on anything in the House of Commons. It's ridiculous. And that's exactly the way people are when you turn them into a mob. We had a system whereby we voted for our representatives, and our representatives then went to Westminster. As Churchill said, it was far from a perfect form of democracy, but it's the best that we have. And it was the best that we had, until it's been turned on its head. And now we're demanding the MP didn't vote the way I wanted her to vote. Well, hang on. If she voted that way, she would have been against another 17,000 and voted another way. The system we have to live by. And if we're not prepared to live by it, we're not prepared to live by rule of law. And believe me, let me tell you now straight, if you think that I'm being unreasonable and unjust and silly, is I have lived and worked where many people haven't. In the old communist countries, in the old dictatorships, in the Balkans, in the Baltics, in the CIS, and I've worked in Moscow as well. Well, if that's what you want, it looks as if that's what you're going to get. But I tell you, it is very, very uncomfortable, because you don't know what's going to happen the next day, and you don't know what's going to happen because nobody gives you the vote. Think on that. It's Friday. I'm going up to London later and have a decent meal with a couple of friends. So I've got to put on a decent face, so I'll grin. Article yesterday on how to stop aging, and it's to be very positive about all sorts of things. So I guess I've aged quite a bit this morning with my little rant. But until Monday morning, let's see how I've aged over the weekend. Until then, God bless everybody, and I hope that you'll just do some thinking about rule of law and forget bloody Brexit for at least 2 or 3 days. Diddle pip.